The meeting had been on my calendar for weeks, a strategic review with one of our biggest clients, the kind of session that usually set the tone for the quarter ahead. We were deep into performance metrics and projected deliverables when the lead contact leaned back casually and said, almost as an aside, "By the way, I heard you'd left the company." For a second, the air seemed to thin. The words didn't match the reality I'd walked in with. Nothing in my contract had changed. No resignation had been given. No discussion had even hinted at this. But I kept my expression neutral, answering their questions about campaign strategy as if nothing had been said. Years of client-facing work had taught me that visible reactions can sometimes cause more damage than the news itself. Inside, the questions were immediate and sharp. Where had that story come from? How far had it spread? And most importantly, who stood to gain from planting it? My mind was already building possibilities, tracing connections, while my mouth kept to business. When the meeting wrapped, I thanked them for their time, left with my notes in hand, and walked out carrying something far heavier than project timelines that I knew before I reached my car that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a signal, and the quiet war it hinted at had already begun. That my name's Daniel Reid. And for the past 11 years I've worked as a mid-level account manager in a firm where relationships are currency and reputation is everything. I'm in my late 30s now, but I built my career the old-fashioned way, showing up early, staying late, and making sure no client ever felt like they were chasing me for an answer. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I managed a portfolio of long-term accounts, some of which I'd nurtured from their first contract to multi-year partnerships. My job was equal parts strategy and damage control, refining proposals until they were airtight, resolving issues before they escalated, and making sure quarterly targets weren't just met, but exceeded. Over time, I became the person both clients and colleagues turned to when things needed to be handled without drama. Before that meeting, life at work was challenging in the way that kept you sharp, not bitter. There was the usual shuffle of corporate priorities, the occasional disagreement over budgets, but nothing personal. Internal politics existed, of course, but they were background noise, the sort of thing you acknowledged and then kept moving past. Clients noticed the effort. I'd get small, unprompted notes of appreciation after big launches, or a quiet thank you over coffee during a quarterly review. The bonuses I earned weren't record-breaking, but they were consistent, a steady acknowledgement that the company valued my work. My reputation wasn't built on flashy wins, but on reliability. That's why the moment in that conference room felt so jarring. I'd spent years building a name clients could trust. The idea that someone inside my own company might try to fracture that foundation was more than just a professional concern. It was personal. The first confirmation came from someone who didn't know me anything. A junior analyst stopped by my desk with the kind of careful tone people use when they're not sure if they're stepping into trouble. "Just so you know," she said softly, "Marcus told the Fletcher team you'd moved on. They asked who would take over your accounts." The words sat there, heavy and neat, like a box I hadn't ordered. Shock didn't land as anger. It landed as inventory. Which clients? What wording? Was there a date attached? She pulled up a recap from their call. "Daniel has moved on to other opportunities. We'll make the transition seamless." No mention of a restructure. No hint of a company decision. Framed as a choice I had supposedly made. Another thread appeared 2 hours later. A longtime client forwarded a short message from Marcus. "In light of Daniel's departure, I'll be your direct point going forward." No transition plan, no check-in. Just a door closed behind my back with my name still in the room. A follow-up from a different client echoed the same line. The pattern wasn't a rumor. It was a script. Memory did what it does in moments like that. It pulled up receipts I hadn't planned on revisiting. 2 years earlier, Marcus had sent a deck to a prospective client with the pricing tier misaligned by a decimal. The mistake would have cost us the account. I caught it at midnight, rebuilt the numbers, and drove the revised proposal across town before their morning meeting. He called later and said, "You saved me today." That was the only time he ever used the word me instead of us. There were other moments tucked into long weeks. The last-minute renewal I negotiated when a client threatened to walk after a reporting error. The product pilot I revived after he forgot to loop in engineering before promising a delivery date. The tense internal review where I defended a risky campaign Marcus had approved without documenting the rationale. When it landed, he took the credit. When it didn't, he called it a team miss. I accepted both because the work mattered, and the accounts stayed. Against that history, the phrasing "moved on to other opportunities" felt precise in the worst way. It implied choice, suggested I had left without notice, and positioned him as the steady hand fixing the gap I'd created. Reputation doesn't need loud attacks to break. It cracks along quiet lines like that. A colleague from finance sent me a screenshot of a resource plan showing my accounts reassigned to Marcus, effective immediately. No HR notice, no manager conversation, no documentation in my file. Just a spreadsheet treating a living relationship like a line item to be dragged and dropped. In the margin, a note: urgent outreach to reassure clients during transition. My name, ironically, was still listed as responsible for 2 deliverables due that week. When I finally stepped into Marcus's doorway, he didn't look surprised. "Daniel," he said, without looking up, "I've been meaning to talk." The tone was managerial small talk, the kind used to smooth announcements already made. "Clients were concerned about your availability. I thought it best to simplify. You'll thank me later." He said it like a favor, as if my relationships were clutter he'd helped put away. A measured question was all I allowed. "When did I resign?" He gave a small, practiced smile. "Let's not get hung up on wording. It's a better fit this way. You've been stretched. They need consistency." The subtext was simple: your work continues without you, and I decide the story. Stakes clarified themselves without theatrics. If clients accepted his version, years of credibility could be rewritten in a week. It wouldn't just cost commissions. It would stain the thing I value most in my work: trust. People who believed I left without a word would question every future commitment I made, wherever I went next. And inside the company, the absence of my voice in the narrative would make it easier to file me under "checked out," the label that sticks longer than most warnings. That a part of me cataloged the precise disrespect in his delivery, the way he avoided direct claims while allowing implications to do the damage. Another part counted the practical implications: contract renewal dates, Q3 milestones, org charts. Emotion can run hot in betrayal, but outcomes are decided by clarity. By the time I stepped back from his office, the decision wasn't whether to fight, it was how to do it without noise. Any public scene would feed the story he'd already sold. Unstable account manager, better for everyone that he's gone. A cleaner approach would be necessary, one that stacked records, not reactions. The shock had done its work. In its place, a plan started forming, quiet and deliberate. Locate every instance of the lie, align it with dates, and let the facts do what anger never could. Confrontation would have been easy. One sharp question in the next team meeting, one pointed remark to a client, and the entire floor would know there was a lie in circulation. But easy wasn't the same as useful. Marcus had already framed a version of events that painted me as gone by choice. A public flash of anger would only confirm whatever story he wanted told, that I was unstable, emotional, maybe even relieved to be leaving. I did the opposite. In conversations, my tone stayed neutral, my replies clipped but steady. When people mentioned the news, I nodded once, as if they'd misheard and I didn't need to correct them. That wasn't passivity, it was containment. The less I reacted, the more I could listen. Each new comment was logged with precision. Who said it? Exactly how they phrased it, whether they claimed to have heard it directly or through someone else. I noted the time of day, the setting, even their expressions. These weren't just fragments of gossip, they were data points. Somewhere between the third and fourth confirmation, the shock started to burn away. Marcus wasn't careless. If he was lying this openly, there was an intent behind it, something bigger than a power grab for a few accounts. And intent, I knew, could be mapped if you had enough information. I made a quiet promise to myself that day: no impulsive emails, no whispered warnings to allies, no backdoor counter-rumors. The first move would be observation, not attack. Emotion could wait. Facts couldn't. Every small detail I collected now would either become proof or a map to the truth, and either way, I planned to have both before I made a single visible move. The weeks that followed felt like living in two separate timelines. The one everyone could see, where I continued showing up to work as if nothing had changed, and the one I was building in silence, where every scrap of information was being cataloged and dated. The first tangible proof came in the form of a casual thank you email from a long-term client. They appreciated everything I'd done before moving on and wished me the best in whatever was next. It was polite, even warm, but the phrasing was impossible to miss. The header carried a timestamp, and the CC field revealed 2 internal contacts, both of whom answered to Marcus. I flagged it, copied it into a private folder, and backed it up at home. From there, it became almost routine. Internal meeting summaries, distributed through the project management system, referenced my previous role as if I had already been replaced. In one set of notes dated March 11th, a bullet point outlined the transition of Client A to Marcus's direct management. Transition wasn't an accident of wording. It was the kind of phrase used when something was already approved and in motion. A former colleague I trusted, Melissa, still had friends in the same department. She confirmed over coffee that my accounts were being reassigned one by one. The story being told was consistent. I had left to pursue new opportunities, and my workload needed redistribution. No mention of why I was still answering emails, attending internal calls, or producing reports. The pattern started to sharpen when I laid out the timeline against the contract calendar. Every single client Marcus had shifted to himself or his close circle had something in common. They were accounts I had brought in, many of them during difficult quarters when the company was struggling to meet targets. Several had lucrative renewals coming up within the next 3 months. One spreadsheet, copied quietly from the shared drive, listed projected revenue from each account. The totals were not small. Marcus wasn't just trying to edge me out of the company. He was positioning himself to claim direct credit for millions in renewals. Credit in our industry translated directly into power, not just in bonuses, but in who got listened to, who shaped strategy, and who became indispensable. By the end of the 3rd week, there was no more guessing. This wasn't a misunderstanding, nor was it some clumsy internal shuffle. It was a deliberate extraction. My work, my clients, my record of performance, being lifted out from under me with enough plausible deniability to make it hard to challenge. That clarity settled in with a weight I couldn't ignore. Marcus wasn't operating from impulse. This was planned, timed, and executed with the kind of precision that assumed I wouldn't fight back until it was too late. What he hadn't accounted for was that I was already building the record that would tell the truth, one that couldn't be rewritten once the right eyes saw it. The shift from collecting proof to deploying it was deliberate. Nothing rushed. Nothing emotional. Just the steady execution of a plan that couldn't be dismissed as reactionary. The advantage was mine now, and I intended to use it without crossing a single professional boundary. The first step was to re-anchor relationships that Marcus had tried to quietly sever. I scheduled individual check-ins with my top clients, framing them as routine quarterly relationship reviews. The tone was all business, updates on campaign progress, performance metrics, and upcoming opportunities. At some point in each call, I made a subtle but unmistakable point. I'm glad we're continuing our work together this quarter. There was no need to hint at rumors. The phrasing alone was enough to re-establish my presence without making the conversation about Marcus. Every meeting was followed by a written thank you email. Those emails weren't just polite follow-ups. They were dated, timestamp confirmations that I was still the active account lead. If any question arose later, I could point to those records and the chain of correspondence with decision-makers who mattered. Parallel to that, I began assembling the formal package for compliance. It wasn't just a collection of complaints. It was structured like a case file. Each piece of evidence was labeled with dates, sources, and a brief explanation of its relevance. Emails from clients, internal meeting notes, call logs. Every item tied back to a timeline showing when the false narrative was spread and which accounts were moved. The tone of my report was strictly professional. No accusations about character. No speculation about motive. Just documented actions and their measurable impact on company operations and revenue. I knew that compliance officers didn't respond well to emotional appeals. They needed clarity, structure, and a risk assessment. They couldn't ignore that I also built in contingencies. If Marcus tried to counter with claims of my absence or neglect, the calendar entries, client deliverables, and timestamp project files would stand as irrefutable proof of continued engagement. If he tried to argue I had voluntarily stepped back from certain accounts, My follow-up emails with clients would contradict him instantly. By the time the file was complete, I had something stronger than outrage. I had a version of the truth that couldn't be rewritten without Marcus directly contradicting himself on record. The desk had been turned, and now, every move he made would have to pass through the filter I'd set in place. This wasn't about humiliating him or even forcing him out. It was about restoring the facts, making sure the work I'd done, the relationships I'd built, and the integrity I'd maintained couldn't be taken from me in a whisper campaign. If justice meant simply closing the door on the false narrative and moving forward with my clients intact, then that would be enough. And if Marcus chose to push further, I was ready for that too. The performance review was set for 9 a.m. Conference room 3B, the kind of sterile, glass-walled space where you could hear every shift of a chair but still feel like the walls closed in. I arrived early, not to intimidate, but to own the tempo from the moment Marcus walked in. My file sat neatly in front of me, tabs color-coded, each section labeled by date. There was no need to look angry. Precision was more unsettling than outraged that he walked in with the casual air of someone who still believed the narrative was his to control. "Morning," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Let's make this quick. I've got another meeting at 9:45. I gave a polite nod and opened the folder. "Sure. Let's just go over a few recent items to make sure our records match." The first tab was labeled April 12th. I slid the printed email across the table. "This is from a client, thanking me for my work on their campaign before I left the company. Can you confirm who told them I had left?" His eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. "Might have been a miscommunication," he said with a half shrug. "Sometimes clients get the wrong impression." I let the silence do the heavy lifting. Then, without commentary, I slid the second document forward. May 3rd, internal meeting notes from the sales team, referencing my departure and the reassignment of 3 accounts I'd brought in. "Do you remember this meeting?" I asked. His tone shifted to defensive neutrality. "We were just discussing capacity. Nothing final." Again, I didn't challenge the spin. The point wasn't to win an argument. It was to put the contradictions on the table, one after another, until they spoke for themselves. Next came the call log from May 19th, cross-referenced with a calendar invite to the same client. "This shows you spoke to them the same day I was scheduled to present our renewal proposal." After that call, they emailed me saying they'd been told I was no longer on the account. His confidence dipped. He glanced down longer this time, searching for a thread to pull. "Well, if that happened, I'll have to look into it." The final turn was deliberate. I reached for the last section, printed confirmations from 6 high-value clients, each one stating, in black and white, their appreciation for our ongoing work together. These were sent after our recent meetings. I just wanted to make sure we're aligned, that these partnerships are still under my lead. That was the moment the room shifted. The deflection stopped. His eyes didn't meet mine for a full 3 seconds. He leaned back, forced a thin smile, and said, "There must have been a misunderstanding." It wasn't an admission in the official sense, but we both knew what it was, the verbal equivalent of a white flag. The tone had lost its edge, and the clock watching had disappeared. That I closed the folder, slow and deliberate, as if sealing the discussion itself. "Glad we could clear that up," I said. No raised voice, no parting shot, just the quiet certainty that the balance had shifted. Walking out of that glass room, the air felt lighter, not because the problem was gone, but because the truth was now sitting in the middle of the table, too solid to be brushed aside. Marcus could choose to keep pretending, but from that moment on, the pretending would cost him. 6 months later, I walked out of that building for the last time. This time with my own timeline, my own signature on the resignation, and more than a few clients walking out with me in spirit. The move wasn't driven by desperation or defeat. It was the culmination of months spent securing what mattered most. The accounts I had nurtured, the relationships I had built, and the credibility I had fought to protect were intact. In some cases, stronger than before. By then, the company's org chart had shifted. Marcus no longer had direct access to major accounts. A quiet restructuring had reassigned him to an internal role. No memo spelled out why, but the absence of his name on client rosters spoke loudly enough. His circle had shrunk, his influence dulled. Watching it unfold wasn't about revenge, it was about validation. The truth had been documented, And the people who mattered had seen it at my own transition to a new firm felt almost surgical in its precision. The conversations with clients were straightforward, a new role, the same commitment, and an open line for them to reach me. Many followed without hesitation, citing the trust we'd built over years. That trust, I realized, was my real currency, not the title on a business card, not the company logo in my email signature. Looking back, I didn't win by outshouting Marcus or forcing a public reckoning. I won by controlling my narrative, brick by brick, until it was unshakable. The real victory was in knowing that when the story of my work was told, in boardrooms, in client meetings, in industry circles, it would be told accurately. Because I had made sure the facts couldn't be rewritten, that if there's one truth I carried out with me, it's this. In the long game of professional reputation, preparation and precision are louder than any accusation. And if you've ever faced someone trying to write you out of your own story, I'd like to hear how you wrote yourself back in.